We're speaking tonight on the subject, making a global impact through harvest. When we look at the theme of this month, we recognize that it is a theme that bears with it the idea, at least, of a task far beyond any individual or group of individuals. Yet it's exactly what our calling is. Exactly. Nothing less, nothing other than our calling. This is our Great Commission. Amen. When Jesus left this earth, He left with the church that He Himself started a command to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. That is exactly what making a global impact is. I would dare say that the church that Jesus started has been doing exactly that for these 2,000 years of its existence. We've been in the process of making a global impact. And we're still making a global impact. And we still must continue to make a global impact. But that global impact cannot continue if we refuse to be in the harvest. We have to be involved in the harvest. It's interesting to me that Jesus left the church with a commission, and then in preparation for that commission, He said to these disciples of His, and we have to include ourselves in the list of His disciples, He used a comparison of our task as it being likened unto a harvest. Because there's nothing in this world simpler than a harvest. Think about what a harvest is. We know that there are things that have to happen to lead up to a harvest. The farm life, though it's probably a simple life, it's not an overly complicated life. I mean, to be a farmer today would be probably an expensive venture. You would either have to lease or purchase vast amounts of property in order to be a successful farmer. You'd have to lease or purchase vast numbers of implements, equipment, and spend a pile of money to accumulate the necessary equipment to do the job. Equipment or personnel, one or the other. And more likely it would be a need for the equipment, since you probably can't hire enough personnel to do the kind of work that needs to be done, but I digress. Then you would have to prepare the ground. By the way, you would have to make sure that you have sufficient infrastructure in order for this ground to, get ample water, ample fertilizer, ample pesticide, ample herbicide for all the necessary aids to your crops, whatever they may be. Then you'd have to prepare the soil. You have to plant the crops, whatever the crops are that you want to get in the ground. And if it's rice, then you've got to prepare an entirely different way than you would for other things. Prepare the soil, plant the crops, and then you've got to ensure that the crops are cared for sufficiently through watering and through taking care of any additional plants that might grow up amongst your crops. Get rid of those. You don't need them. Get them out of there. Any pests that need to be cared for, gotten rid of. And then at the appropriate time, and you've got a very limited window to do this, you've got to get the harvest. But the harvest, here's where I'm going with this. The harvest in and of itself is a very simple proposition. It's not complicated. By the way, I'm not really sure I know why we as Bible-believing Christians tend to complicate the harvest. It's not complicated. The harvest is going to where the fruit is, gathering the fruit and bringing it into the storehouse. That's the harvest. There's really nothing complicated about that. Now, for some reason, we feel like we have to complicate it virtually into oblivion. We have to decide, well, what actually are we harvesting? And how do we appeal to the harvest? I find that to be just absolutely hilarious. I've actually helped to harvest certain things, and I've never in my life ever had to appeal to an ear of corn. I've never had to appeal to a tomato. I've never had to appeal to an orange or an avocado or a mango or any. I've never had to appeal to any of those things. You just go out where they are and you pick them. Is everybody with me so far? The problem is not that there is no harvest. The problem is not that there are not plenty of fruits to harvest. The problem is that the harvesters, typically speaking, don't get into the harvest. Now let me ask you a question before we get started. And this is going to be a little bit different kind of a message because there are going to be a lot of questions to answer. Which I believe, by the way, is kind of where we are in the 21st century as churches. There are a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I want to start with this question. If we don't reap a harvest, what happens? The harvest dies on the vine. If we don't reap the harvest, do we make a global impact? Do we make a local impact? Do we impact anybody? Not for the good. So if we're going to make any kind of an impact, local, global, or otherwise, we have to get into the harvest. So our making a global impact depends upon our understanding of a few simple principles from our message, from our passage, and here's what they are. They are very simple. Number one is our understanding of the period of the harvest. If you were to look over to John chapter 4, and I trust that you will, verse number 35. John chapter 4, verse number 35. Here's what you'll find. John 4:35, Jesus says this, "Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest. Behold, I say unto you, lift up your eyes, and look on the fields, for they are white already to harvest." So we have some questions that we need to ask ourselves about the period of the harvest. Now notice, Jesus made the statement, "Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, then cometh harvest." Now follow me. I'm convinced that when Jesus made the statement to the disciples, probably they were gathered together. They were in a time of planting time. They were probably at a time when either the crops were just in the ground or the crops were being put in the ground, or perhaps they were at a time when the grapes were just beginning to bloom. But whatever the time period was, there was a common consensus among the people that, well, we're about 4 months from harvest time. Be about 4 months and it'll be time to take harvest. And Jesus was seizing upon the opportunity to remind the disciples of another harvest. A harvest that's more important than bringing in corn or wheat. More important than bringing in grapes. A harvest that, well, essentially, not just essentially, but practically and genuinely, people's lives hang in the balance if we say in our souls, well, the harvest is not yet. The harvest still lies a period of time off. It's not time for us to get involved in the harvest. And so Jesus seized upon that opportunity, and he said to the disciples, "Say not ye, there are yet 4 months, and then cometh harvest." And he says the time is right now. So the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how long should we wait to get into the harvest? Now I know that we're looking at the passage, and I know we're considering the message, and I know that we want to say the right thing based upon what the message is implying to us, or what the message is convicting us about right now, but our answer right now certainly is going to be, well, we shouldn't wait at all. And that would be the right answer. But I have to ask the question, why are we waiting? Are we waiting from signs from heaven? Are we waiting from an okay from a government agency? Are we waiting for some thing to come across our hearts or our minds that says, well, it's all right now, go ahead and get into the harvest? What in the world are we waiting for? Are we at least even bothering to pray, to ask the Lord each and every day, God, please allow me to find someone to whom I can speak, someone that I can talk to make some difference in their lives, somebody with whom I can share the gospel, and I can show the way that I can reach a harvest of someone right here and right now. How long should we wait? I'd have to ask for that person who's, well, to perhaps put it in modern vernacular, whose number is up. How long does he have? And in light of that, how long should we wait? Should we wait for that person to ask us, hey, can you tell me how to get to heaven? Is everybody with me? You understand the questions that we're asking? So the first question, how long should we wait? The second question, can you see the harvest? Jesus said, now, whether or not he was talking about the grape vineyards or the wheat fields or the cornfields or whatever else, he actually said to the disciples, and again, I don't believe this is a reference to an actual farm, but Jesus said, I say to you, lift up your eyes, look on the fields, for they are white, all ready to harvest. He's talking about the souls of men and women. He's talking about people whose lives are in the balance now, who at the very next breath they breathe could be their last, and they could spend the next 5 minutes in eternity. He's saying, I'm saying to you, look on the fields, for they are white, all ready to harvest. Can you see the harvest? Can you actually see it? We talked this morning about having eyes like Jesus' eyes. We need to be able to see people as they are. We need to be able to see that time is short for somebody. Time is short for everybody. Everybody who is not saved has a very short window of opportunity to get saved, and a very short occasion to hear the gospel of Jesus Christ. If we're going to share the gospel, we got to do it right away. And at the first opportunity, here's what I've learned in my brief lifetime, and that is that people have very few opportunities, and you have very few opportunities to talk with the people that come across your path. And you have to seize on the opportunity when the opportunity presents itself. To say, boy, I missed it this time. God, give me another time. That's noble, but it's really not likely. So I ask God to help you to be wise enough, conscious enough, and deliberate enough to share the gospel. You say, well, I don't know that I'm going to be able to say the right thing. Anything would be better than nothing. Throw out a lifeline. People need some kind of a lifeline. Hey, get saved today before it's too late. At least start the conversation. Because it's time. Can you see the harvest? Third question you ought to answer is, what should we observe about the harvest? What should we notice about the harvest? Should we think that the harvest is just now in the very first stages of breaking through the soil? Is that what we should notice? What did Jesus say? He said it's white already to harvest. He didn't say it's just now breaking through the soil. He didn't even say that the harvest is still in the blade or in the ear. It's now ready to be harvested. And then what does that phrase mean, white already to harvest? I think I just answered it. It's time to be harvested right now. The second thing that we have to understand if we're going to make a global impact is the personnel of the harvest. I want to ask you this question. To whom was Jesus speaking when he made the comment that he did in verse number 2? Look again at verse 2. Verse number 2, he said, therefore said he unto them, the harvest truly is great, but the laborers are few. Look at this. Pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest, that he would send forth laborers into his harvest. To whom was he speaking? Look back at verse number 1. The 70 plus the 12. He's already talking to the 12, and he sent other 70 also. So to whom is he speaking when he says, pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest? The 12 and the 70. So roughly 82 people. What is significant about those 82 people? What stands out in the passage in verse number 1? What stands out about those 82 people? Say again? They're saved. What else stands out? Yes, sir? They're with Jesus. What else stands out about those 82 people? God selected them. Good. You're good. You're doing right. What else? He sent them out. That's what I want you to get. They are the ones He's sending out. They're being sent out, which has to imply they're about to do what? They're being sent out, so they're about to do what? They're about to go gather the harvest. And He says to those that are about to go gather the harvest, pray ye therefore the Lord of the harvest. Now, what I'm implying, what I'm trying to get across is, praying the Lord of the harvest is not a prayer for those who would skirt the issue of going into the harvest. Everybody with me? That's not a prayer we pray so we can stay home. Well, now, Lord, I'm going to stay home today, but send laborers into the harvest. No, that's a prayer for those going into the harvest. You following me so far? So what we need to recognize here is the personnel of the harvest, and that is the people who are getting into the harvest, and it has to include you and me. It has to. If the Word is speaking to you and me, then it's you and me. It is you and I who bear the responsibility of getting into the harvest and praying that God would send laborers into the harvest. Everybody with me? A good, strong amen would help me to know that. So help me out just a little bit tonight. So just simply identifying the personnel of the harvest includes us as part of the harvest and says, okay, now I get it. I'm part of the harvest. I need to be getting into the harvest. And while I'm getting into the harvest, I need to be praying that the Lord would send forth laborers into the harvest. There's another personnel of the harvest. And guess who they are? They are the wanted. The ones that we want to gather. The ones that we want to collect. The ones that are needed. The reason for the harvest to begin with. And the ones that we want to get involved in the harvest. So we have two classes of wanted. Those who need to be saved, and those who are saved and need to get involved in the harvest. So we've got both the working and the wanted involved in this thing. So Jesus is describing the harvest in verse number 2 as these who need to, that the harvest is truly white unto harvest, that the fields are white unto harvest. And we know that a farmer plants a harvest for what goal, what intended purpose? for a harvest. He wants to reap a harvest. And in reaping a harvest, what does he want? He wants the fruit of the harvest. I've never met a rice farmer where many of my people lived until their last days. There was a lot of rice farming going on. And I never met a one of them that reaped rice in order to get the hulls. In fact, there's a place just outside of Lone Oak, but between Lone Oak and Carlisle, Arkansas, or maybe it's on the other side of Lone. Anyway, it's a perpetually burning, just an open area. It's a perpetually burning field of rice hulls. It's kind of a low area. They can't grow anything in it. So they've got these, and they pile more and more rice hulls in it all the time, and it burns constantly. And they keep trying to burn off these rice hulls. And every time I've driven by there, I've thought, boy, wouldn't it be great if I had enough intelligence, enough wisdom, enough insight to be able to come up with an invention for something that they could use rice hulls for. And I haven't been able to figure it out, and apparently neither has anybody else. But wouldn't that be awesome? But no farmer raises rice in order to collect rice hulls. They don't want the rice hulls. They want the rice. So the farmer wants the fruit of the harvest. So there's that wanted. What we want is the help with the harvest. So we need to understand, first of all, the period of the harvest. We need to understand the personnel of the harvest, the workers and the wanted, and we need to understand the peril of the harvest. Look at verse 3. This is a very interesting verse. In verse number 3, Jesus says, to those getting into the harvest, go your ways, behold, I send you forth as lambs among wolves. Wow. In other words, everybody look up here a second. It's not going to be an easy path. And if you think that getting into the harvest is going to make everything be okay, if you think your trail ahead of you is going to be smooth and your sailing is going to be easy, you need to think again. Because you're about to get into the snake den. In fact, I wish she was here tonight. I'd say, well, I'm going to say something about it, but she'd get a kick out of this. Margaret Holbrook almost cannot pass a cotton field without crying. Just almost impossible. Jim told me about it many, many times, and I even confirmed it with Margaret, that Margaret was raised on a cotton farm. And every time she drives by a cotton field, she remembers going into the cotton fields to pick cotton. And anybody who's ever picked cotton because they had to knows exactly what she experienced. Your hands dry out, and around the nails, your hands just crack and bleed. And when your hands crack and bleed from picking cotton, you don't get to stop. And when the cotton is ready, the cotton bolls, when the cotton bolls open up and that beautiful white cotton begins to just literally glisten in the sun, that hot, scalding August and September sun begins to bake everybody in that cotton field, dries out those cotton hulls, those cotton bolls, and they're like razor blades. And as you're picking, just cuts the hands, and where the cuticles, the hands begin to split and bleed, those cotton bolls just rip you all to pieces. And you don't get to stop because your hands are bleeding. You don't get to stop because you're hurting. And I can't help but think about going as lambs among wolves, thinking about how difficult the harvest really is. The harvest is painful. Everybody who's knocked on a door and been rejected. Everybody who's knocked on a door and encountered somebody who says, you people are so stupid. You believe this stuff. You know what I'm talking about, Brother John. You people believe this fairy tale. You find out that the harvest is not easy. The rejection just seems to mount up. And even when you win, you actually go through the process, you get a confession of faith out of someone, and then you spend the next months, years trying to get them in church and being rejected. The harvest is painful. And Jesus is reminding that the harvest is painful. But understand something. Just because the harvest is painful doesn't give us a bye. We don't get to beg off and say, well, I think I'll pass on the harvest because it's too painful. I'm sending you forth, he said, as sheep among wolves. Just expect to be ripped up. Expect to be devoured. Expect to be hurt. Just get into the harvest. There are dangers for the laborers. Christians, by the way, are more like lambs, not like wolves. I just have to say this. I'm going to have to quit. I'm not going to be able to finish this. We're out of time. I can't find a single instance where the recommendation is for Christians to act like wolves. I can't find a single instance. For a Christian to be so ravening, to be so devouring of other Christians, the only thing I can say is maybe you're not a Christian after all. Maybe you're a wolf in sheep's clothing. Maybe your true character is being revealed. Do you understand what I'm saying tonight? Jesus said, I'm sending you forth as lambs among wolves. He didn't say, I'm sending you forth in lambs' clothing to be wolves. I just thought I'd throw that little tidbit in additionally. Now listen very, very carefully. Lambs, you're about to go in amongst wolves in lamb's clothing in some instances. But you're about to get into a harvest that is painful. But can I recommend to you, can I suggest to you that what you do is still get into the harvest? Sometimes, everybody look up here. Everybody look up here. Sometimes we have to be like athletes. Oh, I know we're just sheep, but we have to be like athletes and work through the pain. Because the harvest on the other side literally is going to make a global impact. I know we're out of time, but I want you to remember that if we're going to make a global impact, we have to get into the harvest. You say, but preacher, what if I spend all of my time and I actually try, I get into the harvest and I labor at it, I work at it, and I'm only ever able to pick just one fruit. Can I suggest to you that you've made all the difference in the world to that one? As far as that one is concerned, you've made the global impact for him or for her. And you've well invested your life. Now, if you've goofed off and you've just happened to fall on that one, then you need to confess that as sin. But if you've labored at it, you've prayed, and you've worked at it, and God's given you the one, then thank God for it. By the way, you don't know what that one is going to do. So thank God for the one. Make a global impact, one fruit at a time. Father, thank you for the time together. Thank you for loving us. Thank you for giving us the privilege of being yours. Thank you for giving us the privilege of being a part of your plan. And I ask tonight that you would so move in our hearts and help us to realize that we've got to be involved. We've got to be a part. We've got to get into the harvest today. That there is no time left. There's no time to wait. And we've got to be involved. And then we ask God that you'd give us the power to do what you've commanded us to do. And we'll give you the praise for what you do in our lives in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's stand together, please. Brother Elijah's here to lead us. All to Jesus I surrender. And that's all all He's asking for you to do tonight. Just a simple submission. Lord, I surrender all here and now. And I want you to use me. That's it.